5 Live Formula One.
Welcome to Saturday morning live coverage of the Spanish Grand Prix ahead of the 7th race of the season. On the way for you, the final hour of running for free practice 3 before we get to that all-important qualifying. Max Verstappen and Red Bull enjoyed a seamless Friday, finishing top of the timing sheets in a session where teams were tasked with testing a revised construction of the Pirelli hard tyre set to be introduced for the British Grand Prix onwards. Upgrades too for many, including Red Bull as well as Ferrari and Mercedes getting their first proper taste of the new concept they introduced last week in Monaco. But we were left with a few more questions than answers when it comes to the pecking order. It may well be Red Bull at the front, but behind them, it's anyone's guess right now. This is how the championship order looks. Max Verstappen is 144 points at the top, 39 the gap between himself and Sergio Perez, who himself is only 12 points ahead of Fernando Alonso. In the constructors, Red Bull lead the way by 129 points to Aston Martin in second, and they are only a point ahead of Mercedes, who have 119 points, and they are in third. That is how it all looks heading into the 7th race of the season, which gets going on 5 Live on Sunday. Guiding you through all the coverage is myself, Harry Benjamin, former McLaren mechanic Mark Priestley, and the BBC's chief F1 writer Andrew Benson are alongside me. Don't forget you can get involved as well in the conversation. Hashtag BBC F1 for your thoughts and questions. We'd love to hear them. And I'm going to start with a classic, Mark. Rain, weather. It's looking ominously dark. The chance of rain for this session is about 80%, and we're hearing that Saturday today is the greater chance of rain across the weekend that we're going to get.
Yeah, definitely some dark clouds over the circuit. In fact, the weather forecast looks so ominous that actually Formula One have taken the decision through the race director to give every team an extra set of intermediate tyres ahead of qualifying, just been announced. That will just cover them in case they have to use them today and tomorrow, but it will give every team a little bit of flexibility with their tyre selection. So that's how bad it is, the risk is. There are some very dark clouds over the top of the circuit as we speak, and that will give the teams the opportunity, if it does rain, to just prepare in case of a wet race on Sunday afternoon. But it'll also mean that as we start the session with the track being completely dry, they've got to get out early just in case it doesn't rain tomorrow to make use of this dry track.
Certainly. Well, the wind is picking up as well. We can see the flags on the top of the main paddock building waving in the wind. Air temperature is 21.5 degrees. Track temp just under 28 degrees at the moment. There's a little bit of blue sky to one part of the paddock, and then you look onto the other and the mountains in the distance, and it is rather grey and ominous. But right now it is looking dry, but the coats are going on in the grandstand, so I may well have just jinxed it. The umbrellas are up, not for the sun this time like they were yesterday, and a little bit of tree cover for some, but there is a sea of green too in the standings. Of course, we have 2 drivers on the grid from Spain, a sea of green, and on the opposite side a sea of red, one for Aston Martin's Fernando Alonso and the other for Ferrari's Carlos Sainz, and you can hear the cheers in the background. That's the Sainz stand, I think, who are celebrating before we've even got any track action underway. Andrew Benson, BBC's chief F1 writer. Big track changes coming into this weekend as well. The chicane removed, and now we have a really double long right-hander ending the lap, which seems to have been met with universal praise from the drivers.
Yeah, the drivers were all very pleased. Carlos Sainz, for example, said it's a lot better, a lot more exciting, has a lot more character and is more demanding, having the last corners the way they are. I don't think anyone's surprised by that, because that chicane was terrible. But I think if it does actually rain in this session, and it really looks like it's going to at the moment, even if it isn't quite yet, that's bad news for Hamilton, Lewis Hamilton, and Mercedes particularly. He was quite downbeat about his prospects at the end of second practice yesterday. He said if they can't improve the car, he's going to struggle to get into the top 10, and obviously he wasn't in the top 10 yesterday. And even George Russell, who's generally a bit more sort of politically astute when it comes to his comments about the car, if you read between the lines of his comments, even he was clearly not exactly enthused about the Mercedes' chances of qualifying particularly highly. He was emphasising how strong their race pace is, in comparison anyway, to their qualifying pace. So Hamilton was running a lower downforce setup yesterday compared to Russell on a higher downforce setup. Similarly, you had Ferrari running a lower downforce setup yesterday, so it'll be interesting to see whether they stick with that, as opposed to Aston Martin, who ran a high downforce setup with Fernando Alonso second fastest behind Max Verstappen at the end of P2. So Mercedes could really do with some dry running now to see if they've made the changes overnight that Hamilton wanted them to make.
Well, green light on at the end of the pit lane, and everybody is coming out, headed out by Logan Sargent in the Williams, followed by his teammate Alex Albon. But I think, Mark, a lot of them, the entire pit lane wants to get out as much dry track action as they can get before perhaps the rain comes down. They're 2 by 2, some of them, as they head out of the pit lane, but it is the 2 Williamses followed by the 2 Hasses first out on track.
Yeah, everybody queuing up to get out onto the pit lane, out onto the circuit now, but all on dry tyres as we see lightning strikes above the circuit right now. There's definitely a storm coming, which means it is critical that people get out there right now and make use of this dry track. Yesterday was a day of experimentation, really. New circuit changes, as we talked about, new bits on lots of cars up and down the pit lane with a lot of upgrades coming. It was all about learning about those and trying to get an understanding of how their car performs around this new circuit layout. Today they will be checking the cars again, of course, after lots of work happening last night, trying to rectify any problems they had.
Is that rain still coming for start of the session?
Firm, yep. Be light rain to start with, then increasing intensity.
That's George Russell on the radio, not to mention the thunder and lightning we have just seen as well, Andrew.
It sounds like we might have a long hour ahead of us, Harry and Mark.
Say that,
Andrew.
Isn't that always how rain starts? Does it not always start lightly and get
and
heavier?
get more intense as it goes on? Yeah, that was George Russell on the radio there, just confirming to you that our weather reports are accurate. Here's Esteban Ocon.
Rain expected 12:40. That is in 9 minutes' time. Single time lap on this tyre, please.
Bit more specific there from Ocon, a single-timed lap. He is on the medium compound of tyre, and not many on the medium, actually. Only Carlos Sainz on the Ferrari, Ocon and Gasly and Leclerc on the medium. Everybody else on the soft, bar the AlphaTauri, Nick de Vries on the hard, as is his teammate Yuki Tsunoda.
So one thing to say about that is that the medium this weekend is the C2 tyre in Pirelli's range, and the teams really don't like that tyre. It's like the worst tyre of all of them in terms of its overall performance. So that's possibly why we didn't see people using it that much yesterday, although Max Verstappen did do his long run on it, his first long run. But I suspect the race may well be run on the soft, which was looking quite good yesterday, actually, the teams were saying, or drivers were saying, and then the hard.
Yeah, so the soft is the C3 tyre. That's the red banded tyre. That is, as Angie says, the fastest tyre at the moment that we're looking at based on Pirelli's data gathering from Friday. The C2 medium is the yellow wall tyre. That looks about 1.1 seconds slower than the soft at the moment. And then the hard tyre, the C1, the white wall tyre, looking at about 1.6 seconds. But that's entirely based off Pirelli's data from Friday.
Yeah, and those numbers are always a bit misleading because they're talking about one lap ultimate pace there, and obviously the reason why the races are generally run on medium and hard tyres, which according to those numbers would suggest they're being slower, they're not slower for long. So obviously the soft goes off a lot faster than the medium and the hard. So those numbers, they're fine, but they're not really telling us anything because no one's going to qualify on the medium or the hard, are they? But they're not going to. Neither are they going to use the soft for most of the race, probably.
No, I think it's to give an idea, though, the C1 hard, the white wall tyre, it's new for 2023 and based off of Spain last year. Pirelli bringing a new C1 hard because nobody really liked using it in Spain last year. It wasn't really appropriate for the track. So we'll see if that opens up options for strategy coming the race, but the rain might throw that all out the window and it might be a wet race, in which case no slick tyres necessary. Don't follow the rules, or you're having to use at least 2 sets of slick tyre. For those who want to sync up, it is 56 minutes and 4 seconds on the clock, and the first lap times have already come through at the moment. Sergio Perez is fastest on the soft tyre at 1:13.9 in front of Hamilton. Russell and Valtteri Bottas just gets up into the top 4, and Fernando Alonso rounds out the top 5. Max Verstappen is on his first flyer at the moment, coming round the final corner now, the new turn 14, which brings you straight out onto the main straight, and he goes fastest almost immediately, a 1:13.6 for the two-time champion.
Yeah, yesterday that final corner was proving tricky for a lot of people with bouncing happening in the cars, that sort of phenomenon that we thought we'd got rid of. But there were a couple of bumps on the circuit, and I think teams just running the car a little bit low, under massive aerodynamic load, of course, because these two corners are much faster, pushing the car down, and the bumps really unsettling the cars. So I suspect a lot of people having to raise their ride heights overnight.
Yeah, there were teams were saying that bouncing was sort of bump induced as opposed to aerodynamically induced. Of course, once the bump bump induces the bouncing, then the aerodynamics start to have an effect on keeping it going. But what was happening at the beginning of last year was a different phenomenon, or there was that phenomenon too, but it was a different one where on the straights the cars were being sucked down to the ground, and then the underbody was what they call stalling, where it loses the downforce, and then that sets up a cycle of up and down, a frequency of, I think, 5 hertz was what they talked about, around about 5 hertz. But that's kind of gone away this year.
Now, just a message popped up from Race Control saying wet track, so rain coming in for certain. We're not quite seeing it on our screens, but Race Control being prepared. 4.6 kilometres, 2.8 miles this track, 14 turns, and as Mark was saying about that final corner, really it's also affected turn 13 as well, the penultimate corner, getting rid of that slow chicane that everybody hated, particularly Andrew Benson. Now is a really fast double right-hander making its way around really high on the lateral load. Here's Hamilton.
Still not great. Okay, copy.
And we brought up the P word yesterday, didn't we? Porpoising, bouncing, seeing a lot of cars experiencing that coming through the final corner. Mercedes, one of them, that was Lewis Hamilton just on the radio, along with Ferrari. I think we saw the Alpines as well experiencing that, even a bit of the Red Bull too. So something to deal with. Carlos Sainz in his Ferrari, running the new look side pods along with his teammate Charles Leclerc in yesterday's FP1 and FP2. They've got rid of the bathtub scoop that was down on the central part of that side pod. They've changed concept really, which is quite a big thing for Ferrari to do. It's a lot flatter essentially now, isn't it?
Yeah, it's a reasonably significant change, aerodynamically speaking, and it has moved more towards the direction of a Red Bull type concept, an Aston Martin type concept, which lots of teams are starting to do now.
And if we get drizzle, it should start around turn 13 in the next couple of laps.
So that was Nick de Vries's engineer, just again warning him of the rain. Yeah, the Ferrari change is reasonably significant, and of course yesterday was the very first time they got to see that on track. Difficult to get too much of a read on it yesterday, as they were on a slightly different tyre strategy to everybody else. It meant the lap times over long runs were slightly mixed up. The field very, very close, but the other team really with a reasonable change, of course, was Mercedes. We actually saw it in Monaco, but this is the first time really that we get to see it on a more traditional type track. And I guess yesterday they were the team that had most work to do overnight, because their car still looked like a bit of a handful.
Yeah, and so there's a lot of focus on the top edge of the side pods. We talk about Aston Martin have what they call the water slide on the top of theirs, which is kind of like a channel that goes down to the rear of the floor. Ferrari have gone from this sort of scalloped out shape that they had on top of the side pods to this more down slope, which, as Mark says, is more like the Red Bull approach. But actually, it's significant, but it's relatively insignificant compared to the floor. The underfloor, but also the floor edge. And it's interesting that Ferrari have also changed the floor edge as part of this upgrade. And if you look closely at the sort of side, here's Hulkenberg's radio.
Started to have some rain on the visor.
Okay.
He's got some rain on his visor, and someone's gone off, Harry.
And there is a car off into the gravel as the dust starts to clear. I wonder, is that a Williams?
Is it?
I think it's a Williams, actually. And which one is it, though? It's Logan Sargent, the American racer, and he's gone into the gravel. We're looking at the rear end of that car. He's side on, next to the wall.
I think he's hit something, hasn't he? There's
it's
a timer
in the final sector. So Sargent was on a hot lap, and then in sector 3, in the middle of sector 3, he has gone off. He has hit the wall, tyre marks on the wall, and that has brought out a red flag with 51 minutes and 11 seconds remaining of this free practice 3 session. Sargent puts his wheel onto the front end, and we're getting the face shot in the helmet as Sargent clambers out of that Williams. So good to see him making his way out of that car. It doesn't look like there's any particular heavy damage. The wheels are still on, the tethers aren't hanging loose, but there's clearly been some sort of contact with the barrier there.
That's the last corner, Harry. I don't think he's had a small accident there. I think when I don't know, but I get the impression, Mark, it looks to me like that left rear wheel might have been crushed in towards the car a bit. Certainly there's 2 tyre marks on the barrier. We're about to see the replay now. How do you want to talk us through it?
So this is the sound of Logan Sargent, and you're absolutely right. He's coming into the final corner now. The pit lane entry is just to his right. He turns in, gets a huge snap through the gravel. Not as big, actually.
It is a relatively small accident.
It is a relatively small accident.
Well, you say that, and it is, in comparison. He went through a large section of gravel, which did slow the car down, but the problem is, of course, let's hear from him.
You okay?
Oh, I'm sorry.
Copy, copy. You okay, please?
Yeah, I'm fine.
Okay.
That is the sound of a very disheartened driver and also a very disheartened team, because what happens in this situation is, of course, although the car may not look significantly damaged, because it's had a lateral impact to that left rear wheel, it punches the drive shaft into the gearbox, and almost certainly I can see those guys having to end up changing that gearbox ahead of qualifying. The problem is they won't get the car back until after this session is finished, which means they don't have a huge amount of time. The guys and the girls in the garage will be under a significant amount of pressure to get that car going. Actually, given it's a red flag, they may get it back before the end of the session. We'll have to see, but not a good sign for the guys in the Williams garage.
No, well, it was certainly in that final corner, and you can imagine it could have been a lot bigger, but the internal damage to that Williams yet to be defined. Sargent out of that car, walking across the gravel, slightly dejected, but good to see him out of that car as the Red Bull team practice a pit stop with Max Verstappen. The red flag is out, and Sargent luckily doesn't have very far to go to get back to the pit lane. Even runs across the track, and he'll hop over the wall and find his way back to the Williams garage.
And of course, with it being a practice session, the clock doesn't stop here under the red flag, and that means that these precious dry laps that the teams were desperate to get, of course, are just ticking away now, and it may well be that by the time the circuit goes green again, conditions could be very different.
Exactly that. Sargent then helmet off and continues his walk back, which Williams will be right at the end of the pit lane, so it will be an even longer walk for him. But the marshals doing an excellent job of cinching that car up onto the tractor, and as it makes its way around. But you said, Mark, that may well be all the dry running we get, and there is rain falling in Spain, particularly in that final corner as the marshals are working. But no one's going to want to risk going through that final corner on a pair of slicks.
No, it's going to become very treacherous very quickly.
Keeps with the rain, 10, 12, 10, 12.
Understood.
And all the way now to the box. Starting to spit in now.
Okay, copy.
12.
Roger, yeah, getting reports of drizzle.
It's now raining.
Copy.
There we go. All of the drivers confirming what we can now see, that raindrops are falling from the sky. And what it really means is that could be, and we'll wait to see how intense this rain does become, but that could be the end of any representative running for this session, certainly in the short term, which is a real shame for the teams that were desperate to learn about the changes they've managed to make overnight. Mercedes desperately being one of those, as we just see a replay of Logan Sargent's accident, and it looks like he goes into that final corner. I think he's literally just gone in too quickly, because he lost the rear end just as he approached the apex. Didn't really unsettle the car. He hadn't even quite got to the curb, but the back end just slipped away. And at that high speed, as soon as you lose that aerodynamic grip, you are a passenger.
Is he okay?
Yeah, AFM. All good.
And that's Alex Albon, his teammate, on the radio asking if Logan is okay. Also noticing on that replay the gravel here, quite chunky, and a lot of it comes into his cockpit, which is not going to make for a pleasant feeling for Sargent.
Yeah, and takes forever to get out from the mechanics. Just noticed on that slow-mo replay, actually, it was the bump. It was the bump on the circuit that really unsettled the car. So we saw it all day yesterday with all sorts of teams suffering as a result of that, and it just unsettling the car and it bouncing its way around the corner. It looked like to me like the Williams was so much on the limit going into that corner, and that's absolutely fine, but he hit the bump at such a way that the car pops up, it loses that grip from the tyres, it just breaks traction and off it slides, and that is a real risk for everybody, and they're going to have to factor that into the setup of the car. You run the car too stiff and you hit a bump like that, you literally can find yourself in the gravel before you've had a chance to react.
That's the voice of the former McLaren mechanic Mark Priestley, alongside myself, Harry Benjamin. The BBC's chief F1 writer Andrew Benson is here as well. Currently under red flag conditions here for the final practice session after Logan Sargent in his Williams had an off in the final corner, finding the gravel, finding the wall. He is out of the car, and the stricken Williams makes its way back to the pit lane, but because it is practice with the red flag out, the time continues to tumble down here. 45 minutes and 23, 22, 21 seconds remain. However, the rain is falling fully now, which is going to, well, certainly mean dry running for the rest of this session. It might well be done and dusted. the big question now is a lot of work being done onto the back of that Red Bull of Max Verstappen while he is in the garage having checks done to his Red Bull. The big question, I suppose, is how much of this carries over to qualifying, because if it is going to be a wet qualifying, they're still going to want to go out in FP3 and get this done. At the start of the weekend, they get 4 sets of inters, 3 sets of wets. As you said, Mark, right at the start, they've been given an extra set of the intermediate tyre if they due to the lack of wet running that they may well get. But this is going to be a tough one for teams to call.
Well, it is. You can never quite predict exactly what level of wetness, if that is such a phrase.
We'll go with it.
Andrew will definitely pick me up on that one. But you can't quite judge the conditions that are going to be in place this afternoon. So, yes, there's definitely an opportunity to go out if they get green flag situation again and the circuit is wet. We've got that extra set of tyres. That will encourage people to get out there. But you don't know what it's going to, how comparable it's going to be. So you want to get a feeling of your car, but really what they needed to know was whether they'd improved the car from yesterday. It's looking more likely that the race will be drier than wetter. I guess today was the higher chance of rain. So we've got to start setting the car up, or thinking at least partially about the race. And they needed to know whether the changes they made last night after yesterday's practice sessions had done the trick.
The sky actually doesn't look too bad. I've been in Barcelona. When it gets wet, it gets really wet. Think about the 1992 Grand Prix, which Nigel Mansell completely dominated, and the 1996 Grand Prix that Michael Schumacher completely dominated. Those were miserable, miserable days. The sky was just a carpet of dark grey. Here today, it's not like that. There's patches of blue already. So maybe it won't rain all session. Maybe it won't rain for qualifying. Obviously, I'd like it to stop raining, at least for now. Now, ironically, you want the rain in qualifying more than you want it in practice, don't you? Just to finish the point I was making about floor edges. So Ferrari have changed their floor edge design. Now, it sounds trivial, but actually, if you look at the floor look at a Formula 1 car side on, you can see that the floor edges have these swirls and cuts and swoops and all sorts of different shapes in them. And what they're doing is they're setting up what they call vortices of air. And those vortices of air go along, they're like little spinning tornadoes of air, and they run along the side of the floor, and they effectively seal it. And that means it stops the air that's under the floor escaping out the side. And they want to do that because under the floor they have these things called venturis, which is a kind of down and then up slope. And you want the air to go through there as fast as possible, because the faster your air goes through there, the lower the pressure, and therefore the greater pressure differential between the top of the car and the bottom, and therefore the more suction onto the ground. And actually, if you talk to a Formula 1 engineer, we're looking actually at a picture of the Mercedes, and you could see all those scoops and scallops and what's have yous on the side of their floor. If you talk to a Formula 1 engineer, they say the complexity of the vortex structures that you get on these modern Formula 1 ground effect Formula 1 cars is absolutely mind-blowing. And it all starts with the, if you see the floor entry, there's like 4 vertical strakes at the very entry to the floor, just behind the front suspension. And those things set up the airflow through the floor, and then those vortices off those coincide with other vortices that the floor creates, and then the side vortices that the floor edge creates. And one of the interesting things about the Red Bull being lifted up in Monaco was that I spoke to an engineer about that, and he was like, it was an absolute wow moment for him. He said the 3D-ness of the shapes of those strakes, so they're not just straight up and down, they're not just slightly curved in one dimension, they're sort of curved and then changing, and like sort of almost like organic, like you see those computer programs that do like sort of shapes in fluid, which is literally what they are. They're shapes in fluid, because it's fluid. Air is fluid, and they're trying to make the air, and the floors, they have lumps and bumps, and it's so complex what they're doing under there.
It's probably the biggest technical battleground in Formula 1 since the big changes of last year, the big technical regulation changes. And it is, of course, as you rightly say, the one bit that you can sort of keep secret in the most part from other teams. Everyone else can see all the other surfaces around your wings and your bodywork and your side pods. They can't typically get a look at the floor. So you're right, that shot of the Red Bull being hoisted up in the air was an absolute sort of gift to all of the other technical members of the teams up and down the pit lane.
I believe indeed McLaren's Andrea Stella was saying as well, admiring the work Red Bull have done on their floor after getting a good look at the Red Bull hoisted up in the crane in Monaco. Session is back underway, 40 minutes and 19 18, 17 seconds remain. However, no one has gone out. They are all in the garages, and the McLaren team of Lando Norris standing by, but no movement at the moment. Tyres covered up in the tyre blankets. Drivers in the cars, though, but we shall wait and see if we get much running. It's going to be important to do so, even though they're thinking the rain is going to stop maybe at around half an hour's time or so. Either way, I'm just saying this for our benefit. They've got to go out at some stage, surely.
Well, you might well be sitting at home thinking, why on earth aren't they just going out? We could have these conditions in the race. And it's absolutely true. There's always something to learn. But within the current restrictions that Formula One has, you haven't got enough tyres to just go and try every set of conditions. You've got to be really strategic about how you use them. And yes, we've got that extra set of intermediates, but it's not really wet enough for those right now. And yet it's not dry enough to put some dry tyres on.
I think if it's wet, people will go out just to try the inters out, because you can still get a feel for the car, can't you, Mark? Especially if the track's not that wet.
It's also, if you remember back in Monaco, it was the very first time we had the introduction of the brand new wet tyres that didn't need tyre blankets. So that was the first time we ran them, but that was Monaco, and as we keep saying, that was a very specific type of circuit. This is a more traditional, more, in inverted commas, normal circuit. So you're absolutely right, there's definitely things to be learnt, but we're just in that weird sort of changeover period where it's not wet enough and not dry enough.
We've just seen the FIA technical delegate, Joe Bauer, marching down the pit lane, clutching a little bit of carbon fibre. We got a close-up look, and it certainly looks like a part of the Williams floor, perhaps, that has been broken off in that incident. And Joe Bauer has got above and beyond and picked it up and delivered it back to the Williams team. So excellent work from Joe Bauer there, delivering piece by piece that Williams.
So I think Williams are going to find that there's quite a lot of damage on that car, not just on the left-hand side, which is obviously smacked into the barrier, albeit not that heavily. But I noticed that as Sargent was going along the gravel and then came to a stop, the other side of the floor, so the bit of the floor that didn't hit the wall, was also damaged quite badly at the sort of that frontal area that I was just talking about with the straight. So it's basically going to be a new floor for that car.
He went through such a long spell in the gravel, didn't he? And at such high speed that, it rips the floor to shreds. He hit the front left tyre as well, and that will have probably done some damage. Doesn't take a lot. These cars are incredibly strong in the sort of loads they're designed to receive, but when they hit a wall, of course, it's not designed. You could almost step on one of those wishbones and break it yourself. When it gets a lateral load, certainly a high impact force like hitting a wall, it doesn't take much to just cause a little tweak and damage, and it has to be changed again. And of course, don't forget, all of these things come off your budget, which is now restricted through this cost-capped era, and a team like Williams, that can take a big hit.
It certainly can, and the Williams team, especially Albon, although he has been saying that about nearly every track we've been to the last couple of races, that Barcelona isn't going to suit our car, but certainly free practice times they were towards the end, particularly Logan Sargent, which is a shame for Sargent as well, the rookie in his first year at the bottom of the drivers' standings, and was looking forward to this track, one that he and many of the other drivers are much more familiar with, not to mention it's been on the Formula One calendar, but also F2 and F3, and particularly one that has seen testing take place for many years, but Sargent then out of this practice session, but nobody still out on track at the moment. Of course, the scene of Williams' last Formula One win as well, back in 2012 with Pastor Maldonado.
Yeah, what a day that was, eh?
Still get goosebumps watching that back, over a decade ago now. It's hard to believe, but Williams certainly, improved fortunes, I think, from last year. And actually, the Haas drivers, Kevin Magnussen and Nico Hülkenberg, highlighted it yesterday too. Hülkenberg finished third, by the way, although how much you read into that, maybe not too much. But it's very tight. After Red Bull, I think Kevin Magnussen was about half a second away from his teammate after FP2. Magnussen was down around about 15th place and Hülkenberg was up in third.
Top 17 drivers separated by less than a second in FP2 yesterday. That's an incredibly close split if you take Max Verstappen out of the picture.
There's always that big if, isn't there?
Well, actually, no. I mean, that is including Max Verstappen down to 17th. I mean, if you take Max out, the whole field, I think, was split less than a second, or just around a second. So that's closer than we've seen in recent times. And this, of course, this circuit has become faster with the introduction of this new final part, the two quick right-handers. That means the lap time comes down, and that means that the overall spread will get smaller, won't it? Because there's less of the circuit is not as long as it used to be for teams to spread out their lap times. So it should make things closer, particularly when we get to qualifying this afternoon. And that means either a tiny mistake or a tiny improvement can catapult you one way or the other up the grid.
It certainly can. We've just seen some images of the wider viewing areas from the track. One side looking very grey, very misty, rain still coming down, but as Andrew Benson mentioned a few moments ago, one side of the track there is a little bit of blue sky in the air. Certainly not dampening spirits for those in the grandstands. The full wet weather gear is out, the umbrellas are up, but the smiles are still on faces and enjoying their time here at the Circuit de Barcelona, Catalunya. The clock continues to count down, of course. 34 minutes and 32. 31 and 30 seconds left of practice 3. My name's Harry Benjamin. Alongside me is the former McLaren mechanic Mark Priestley and the BBC's chief F1 writer Andrew Benson. On the subject of Sargeant and rookies, we talked a bit about the rookies yesterday, of which 3 of them in the field, along with Oscar Piastri and Nick De Vries in the AlphaTauri and the McLaren respectively. What have you thought of our rookies so far, Mark?
I think they've all done okay. No, I think they've all done okay, and I touched on this a bit yesterday. I think whenever you see a rookie come into Formula One, they tend to come in with a little bit of hype. I think Oscar Piastri, perhaps the one that had the most of that hype. Last couple of years, people have been really talking about his meteoric rise through the lower categories, if you like, and then there was all this controversy around 2 teams fighting over his services for this year. He's ended up at McLaren. Has he set the world alight? I don't think he set the world alight, but that's a very rare occurrence, I think, in modern Formula One. I think the last time that happened, as I said yesterday, was Max Verstappen. But in reality, he's done a really solid job, and I think that's what teams are looking for. Your rookie season is about making mistakes. You're going to make mistakes. We all do it. And as long as you learn from those and the team sees constant progression and that you're not being completely blown away consistently by your teammate, then I think that still classes a good rookie year. And I would say that certainly Piastri is looking like that's the trend that he's on. I think Sargeant's had a slightly more difficult start to the season. This accident that he's just had in practice 3 certainly won't help that. It won't help with his confidence or his reputation, either inside or out of the team. And I think De Vries been a bit inconsistent, but still reasonably solid. So I don't think any of them have shown themselves up. I just think that it's solid and perhaps nothing more yet.
I just want to mention some news that's happened. Gunther Steiner, the team principal of Haas, has been summoned to the stewards for an alleged breach of articles 12 of some articles. I won't now read out the numbers. Now, I've not looked up these articles in the International Sporting Code, but it's to do with the news conference he conducted a couple of days ago. And if people remember, what he did in that news conference was call the stewards, what's the word I'm looking for, laymen decisions he accused them of, and called for Formula One to think about introducing permanent stewards. And it was all to do with the penalty that Nico Hülkenberg got for, well, he said he didn't crash into anyone in Monaco at Mirabeau, but the stewards thought he had. And Steiner wasn't happy about it, so yes, he's obviously going to have his knuckles rapped by the stewards for saying that. Yeah,
so he's going to get hauled in front of the stewards for saying something naughty, and for the first time it's not swearing.
No, a little bit of a telling off there from Gunther Steiner, who, yes, interesting to note that, being summoned to the stewards.
Did they break the curfew last night, by the way, the Haas team? I got a message from a friend of mine who said it was looking like they were potentially going to be there late at the track.
They did, and so did Williams, actually. They're still within their permitted number of exemptions.
Yeah, OK.
So working late then, past the allotted time for both Williams and Haas, and Williams then have more work to do today, by the sounds of things, to see exactly how much damage then is on that Logan Sargeant Williams, whether they can get him out for qualifying.
Just on that, for the team's perspective, when you see your driver go into the wall, obviously it's a sinking feeling. There's a huge amount of work coming your way, probably under huge time pressure, particularly on a day like Saturday. And when you have a rookie in the team, you sort of expect that to some extent. I just thought, as we've got a bit of downtime, I'll tell you a quick story about when Lewis Hamilton was a rookie. Because when Lewis was a rookie at McLaren, he came in, of course, at the same time that Fernando Alonso joined our team. And, of course, Fernando was the current world champion. and Lewis was a complete rookie. And at that time, I can tell you this, nobody in our team wanted to work with Lewis Hamilton when they were dividing up who worked on which car pre-season, because everybody, A, wanted to be on the World Champions car, and B, thought, if we're working with Lewis Hamilton, the potential for disaster as he goes through his rookie year is huge. And so there was this sort of internal battle to not be on Lewis's car and be on the one that they thought was going to bring success. And of course, as we now know, it didn't turn out quite that way.
No, not at all. Which side of you were on?
I was in the middle. I was looking after them all. Luckily.
Get paid extra for that.
Didn't have to pick sides, yeah.
Well, yeah.
What did you do when Ron did pick sides?
Oh, here we go. Oh, no comment.
Read the book. Yeah. Oh, brilliant. Coming back to the Gunther Steiner steward chat, hashtag BBC F1, someone's got in touch. Jack has got in touch. But Steiner is right. We should have full-time stewards.
So the argument against it is that there's always been that they would get favourites, and people would form a picture of a certain driver, and you'd end up with bias, and it wouldn't be fair. The idea of changing the stewards around is to remove that. So it's like impartial judges, basically, or impartial juries is the idea. The problem with that theory is that basically, as one of the team principals pointed out in the press conference yesterday, it is basically the same bunch of stewards. It's just not the same four. It's the same, I don't know what the number is, 20 or 25 or something, that rotate around. And as one of the team bosses said yesterday, it's the same faces all the time. It's just not the same faces every race. So, I mean, look, you can argue it both ways. It doesn't look like the FIA are going to change it. And they generally take quite a dim view of team principals publicly slating them on what is relatively trivial matters. And I have to say, I don't know, can either of you remember the Mirabeau incident with Hülkenberg? Because I don't remember seeing it, so I can't comment on whether I felt it was a justifiable penalty or not. But
was it the one right at the start where he sort of went deep down the inside and had a bit of a coming together with one of the Williamses?
Yes, I'll describe it to you in Gunther Steiner's words.
Go on then.
It's turn 6 when they're in a line and the Aston Martin is in front. I just looked at the picture and Nico comes from the inside and is in front basically, dives into the corner, but I cannot see a collision. So I'm trying to get it explained to me because I think it was completely wrong. It's lap 1, there was no collision, and in the end, what should we make? A parade. There are other people running into each other during the race, which is fair. Perez had a bit of a demolition derby, didn't he? They get the black and white flag, so I think it's very inconsistent. Then we look at the incident in Miami between De Vries and Norris on lap 1, which is true. De Vries just rammed Norris up the back, and that was no collision. So he doesn't understand it, Steiner says. So I don't know what happened in the incident. Oh, just turn myself off there. Sorry.
You're right there, Andrew.
If they didn't touch, then obviously it's hard to argue that he deserved a penalty, but I can't comment myself.
I think if it sounds like it definitely was the early lap incident, then for me that's a bit of a first lap around Monaco. He was trying something down the inside. Right? Yeah, exactly. You're going to come together. Lance Stroll was playing bumper cars with the walls. We have just had a car go out. Lando Norris in the McLaren to do a little lap. He went out on the intermediate tyre, but he is straight back in again and wheeled into his garage just to get a little taster of the conditions.
It was just a little exploratory lap, and I can tell you he was all over the place. He was struggling on curbs, very, very slippy on the curbs. He was running wide at a couple of corners. So it was just really to sense the conditions, to get a feel for them. Everybody else, of course, will have been looking at that, but he was literally struggling all the way around on those very cold intermediate tyres, taking some strange lines.
He cuts the corner, really.
Cuts the corner, all four wheels up on the curb, but I think that's partly because he's sort of struggling to get round there and thinking if he does take the normal line, he's not going to make it. So still very treacherous at this point, and maybe not wet enough for those inters. I get the feeling the inters wouldn't last 5 minutes if you actually started pushing them in these conditions.
No, that was the sound you just heard there was on board with Lando Norris's McLaren as he teeters around the left-hander of turn 10, runs out wide, the rear nearly goes round on him, and he's so tentative with putting his foot on the throttle and just about makes it back into the pit lane, and he's straight into the garage. So although we are still running to time here. Nobody in the pits, which means we have time for some more questions. And this is coming on the email f1@bbc.co.uk from Chris McNulty. Hi, folks. Can I ask Mark a question about rubber on the track? If rubber from the tyres adheres to the track and improves traction, why is it so easily washed away by rain?
Well, it's not the sort of rubber that you can see when you see on the television, that the big chunks of rubber, they actually rarely do get washed away by rain unless it's very heavy. But then you're talking down at a sort of microscopic level, the tiny little indentations, and this is what happens. The indentations in the tarmac, which are microscopic, get filled up to some extent with tiny bits of rubber as the car starts to lay that down. And that, of course, gives you this layer. The track becomes smoother, but it becomes rubberized. So the rubber of your tyre connecting with the rubber on the circuit in dry conditions gives you a lot more grip. And it's those tiny little pieces that fill in the little microscopic indentations that do get washed away in a heavy downpour. So the sort of rain we got here will make very little difference to that. But the flip side of all of that is when you do have rubber down on the racing line and it gets wet, as you can imagine, wet rubber against wet rubber, that suddenly becomes more slippery. So the grip conditions can change dramatically with a rubberized circuit as you get a little bit of dampness on it.
I'm just going to give you a little bit of news. I'm not going to talk about rubber. It's only little news, but Pierre Gasly has had his engine replaced. So he's now on his third internal combustion engine and third turbocharger and third MGUH and MGUK. He's still within the allowance at the moment, but there's only 4 for the season. It's only race 7. Am I counting correctly?
It's not a good start, is it?
I think Alpine are going to have a grid penalty significantly before the end of the season as a result of that.
And of course, don't forget, one less race than they originally planned for with Imola disappearing, so that's not good news for them.
Yeah, you're right. And of course, the allocation actually upped for the 23 race season initially. The ICE, the internal combustion engine, 4, up from 3, along with the MGUH, MGUK and the turbocharger. The NEG store still at 2, along with the control electronics, and they get 8 exhausts for their allocation too. I think it all comes down to that Alpine going up in flames, doesn't it, in Baku, which certainly didn't help their cause. And, Laurent Rossi, the CEO of Alpine, won't be happy to hear that. But if they can get another podium again this weekend, like Esteban Ocon managed to achieve in Monaco, well, that might go some way to dampening the inevitable penalty that might be coming Alpine's way later on in the year. 23 minutes and 2-1. 0 seconds left of free practice 3. This is live coverage of practice 3 with myself, Harry Benjamin, the former McLaren mechanic Mark Priestley alongside me, along with the BBC's chief F1 writer Andrew Benson. We started the session in dry conditions with rain threatening, and then it did come down. But before it came down, Logan Sargent in the Williams, the rookie driver, the American, found the wall coming through the final corner, through the gravel, into the barrier. That brought a red flag out. He made his way back to the pits, and the car having to come back via a tractor. The marshal's doing a great job there. Then the rain came down, and the rain is still coming down. We've only had one car out on track to test the conditions. That was Lando Norris in the McLaren in the intermediate tyre. Did one lap. Didn't like it, came back in, pretty much. So we are still kind of just filling the air, let's be honest.
It is still raining, as you say. I get the impression that no one's going to be able to literally sit this session out. There's too much valuable running time to be had. And even if it's just testing any new components on the car, getting a feel for what the car is like in these conditions, because we could well have conditions like this at some point over the weekend. And even if it destroys a set of tyres, that's still valuable learning, because you get to learn that sort of crossover point between wet and dry, depending how this plays out. But I suspect with 10 or 15 minutes left towards the end of this session, we will start, I hope, to start to see teams creeping out and just getting a few laps on the board and learning what they can.
While we've got a bit of time, I think I asked Angie this yesterday, do we like this track? And we certainly like it a lot more now that we've got rid of the slow chicane. But the rumours coming into this weekend as well that a new track in Madrid might, or certainly Madrid might become the host of the Spanish Grand Prix in future years. Andrew, what do we know about this as we do actually get some track running finally? And first out, it's the 2 Ferraris, one doing a practice start. That's Charles Leclerc from the end of the pit lane. Carlos Sainz straight out onto the track in the intermediate tyres with just under 21 minutes left to go. But we'll finish this point on the possible Madrid future for the Spanish Grand Prix, Andrew.
I think it's quite likely to happen,
okay.
From what I hear. more than quite likely. There's a plan. There's a new sort of park area, and it's hard to describe what you mean. It's got a new facility which has got like offices and leisure facilities and that sort of thing being created near Barajas, near Madrid. I'm not going to say the word. Madrid International Airport. Barajas it's called, isn't it? It's just basically near there, and the idea is to have a street race in that area. It's a bit like Mokpo in Korea, but better, because it's Madrid, not in the middle of nowhere. And I think the Madrid authorities, there's a company involved, I can't remember the name of it, a big Spanish company is involved in this development. They're leading the project.
Didn't they just have a big F1 exhibition in the centre of Madrid?
That's right. The F1 exhibition is in Madrid at the moment. That's going to then start touring the world. So I think Barcelona's contract runs to the end of 2025, is it? So they're looking at Madrid taking over from Barcelona at that point.
No possible way to do the alternate, or perhaps have both on the calendar like we did at one point with Barcelona and Valencia, of course, which was branded the European Grand Prix.
So alternating races in one country, they don't really do them because it doesn't work financially for either circuit. If you remember what happened with Germany and Hockenheim and Nürburgring, I mean, I think Nürburgring had other issues financially apart from that, but that was one of the concerns for them. It didn't really work for either circuit doing it that way. So I can't see that. I think it's either going to be Madrid or Barcelona. The feeling is, from what I'm hearing from senior people in Formula One, that Madrid's it's a pretty decently reasonable chance of it happening.
Can I ask, what do we think about the... I mean, I can hear people collectively at home going, oh, not another street race. But Formula One has this move towards sort of destination events. And I was at the Miami Grand Prix as a fan recently. I have to say, it was fantastic because there's so much else going on in the city. There were so many other things. When you get away from the racetrack, there's loads to do. And I can see why that attracts fans to the area. But at the heart of what Formula One has to surely be a great product, which has to be racing. So how do those two sit with each other in the longer term?
It's an interesting question. And, you know, it hasn't gone unnoticed by the drivers that there is this increasing trend towards new tracks being street circuits. And I don't think they mind as long as it doesn't go too mad. Science is going around, it's definitely still raining, although there is blue sky, but there's no question it's still raining. It's certainly into weather. How far off the pace is he, Harry? Is about...
he comes across the line.
12 and a half seconds off. Yeah. So it's still quite wet. I think they don't mind it as long as they're good street circuits. You know, Valencia is a good example of one that wasn't good, although the last race in Valencia, ironically, was an absolute classic, largely thanks to Fernando Alonso, and probably the best driver of his career so far. But they're not all great. But I think people love Singapore, even though the race isn't always that fascinating because it's so demanding and challenging as a place to go. Obviously, everyone loves Monaco. Miami, I think the drivers that wouldn't say this because it's so important to Formula One, that event, but the track's a bit sort of meh in Miami.
What makes a good street track then, Andrew, in your mind?
It's challenge, isn't it? It's being actually a street circuit, and you know, basically it's the same as what makes a good any track. You know, challenging corners, things that make the drivers.
And overtaking opportunities.
And an overtaking opportunity, which obviously Monaco doesn't have. But you see, even that in Monaco last weekend, Christian Horner was saying, yeah, it would be good if we could find a way to make at least one overtaking spot potentially here. But I don't think the Monaco Automobile Club are interested in changing the circuit. So,
no,
I mean, everyone's going to have a different opinion. It doesn't really matter what mine is on that subject, you know. Everyone has a different one.
What about Vegas?
Well, I don't know. Vegas is going to be like, I think it's going to be one of the most surreal experiences of my life. It's a race.
Andrew Benton in Vegas.
It's a race. I've been to Vegas actually already before. I won't give you the details of my big American road trip.
No, what happened there?
I went to Vegas for 3 days there. It's not the place I would choose to go on holiday, but that's not really what I was referring to. It's going to be basically, when you look at the time of that race, it's going to be a race close to the west coast of America on Japanese time, effectively, because it's at 10 o'clock at night. And I don't know how the weekends are going to operate. Like in Singapore, everyone stays up until about 5 in the morning and then goes to bed, and that's fine. But at Vegas, we've been talking about this, haven't we, Paddy, the producer, how we're going to manage the weekend, because, you know, you're not going to finish work till 3 or 4 in the morning. are you going to have breakfast for dinner and then dinner for breakfast, or what do you do? I don't know. It's going to be really fascinating to find out.
But in terms of the actual track, because it's another street circuit, right? Are we saying that Formula One is turning more and more to these street circuits, but it's not so much about the street, it's more about the surrounding atmosphere? Because are we all just going to love Vegas because of the surrounding feeling of it, or are we actually going to get a decent track? Here's George Russell one moment.
It's definitely raining. The track just doesn't seem that wet.
Which is a very good point made by Russell. We have got cars out on track. Should just say Verstappen, Perez, Sainz, Russell, as you just heard there, Leclerc, all out along with Norris, De Vries, Stroll, and pretty much it's easy to tell who's not out there. Hamilton's not out there. Alonso's not out there. Bottas, Tsunoda, Zhou Guanyu and Logan Sargent, for obvious reasons, who crashed at the start of the session, not out there. Everyone out on the intermediate tyre, though. It is wet, but it's not wet, and that's my analysis of the track conditions at the moment. But
that's kind of what George Russell said, isn't it?
Yeah. So I'm with George on that one. But just coming back to that Vegas point, is it less and less about how actually good the track is now?
No, they definitely want to have good tracks, and they definitely want to have tracks with overtaking places, but they also want to have them in destination cities. So if people cast their minds back to when Liberty Media first took over Formula One, that was one of their mission statements, was to have each Grand Prix like a Super Bowl, which I don't really know how 23 or 24 Super Bowls a year
works. It dilutes
as a concept. Right? Yeah, but that's kind of a different conversation.
Yeah.
What I would say is that I've really noticed the increase in popularity of Formula One over the last couple of years. It actually, the first time it really blew my mind was when I went back to Austin. Austin was the first race I went back to after COVID in 2021. And Austin was always a really popular race. It was always a buzzy city. It's a fabulous event. If anyone wants to go to have a sort of trip of a lifetime to a Grand Prix, I would put Austin very close to the top of your list. But back into it was just a busy city and a cool city, and there was a Grand Prix nearby. When you went back in 2021, it was so much busier, but it wasn't just that it was busier, it was what it was busier with. People wearing team kit, wandering around downtown Austin and up South Congress, which is his Albon's radio.
Yeah, it feels quite dry.
It's quite dry, Alex Albon says. And I think people were saying, everyone in Formula One noticed it. Toto Wolff, I had a chat with him in the paddock that weekend, and he was like, wow, this is amazing, this event, isn't it? And pretty much from that moment on, every race has felt like that. Formula One has got so much bigger. It brings with it complications for people who are working, like massively expensive hotel rooms, for example. But for the sport itself, there's no question it's going through this kind of sort of golden period of popularity. Whether that lasts through 5 years of Max Verstappen domination, we'll have to see if we do get 5 years of Max Verstappen domination. But so the point I'm trying to make, I think, is that whatever Liberty Media have done, and I could go through it, but it has made a big difference, and these destination events are happening. And just to bring us back to where we started this conversation, Spain, you can't really go wrong, can you? You either go to Barcelona or Madrid. It's a win-win. They're both fantastic cities. They're both places people are going to want to go to.
You're talking about the city. You're talking about the city. Yeah, but we're talking about a permanent racetrack here.
Yeah, but you're not far from Barcelona here, are you? You can stay in Barcelona and come to the Spanish Grand Prix, and it'll be the same in Madrid.
But I'm talking about the difference between what Formula One is, which is, at its heart is got to be great racing, because yes, the city affects a tiny proportion of the people who follow it, because that's the people who are there. By far the greatest part of our audience is watching from afar, and they just want to see great racing. So that's my worry, and it's not a massive concern at this point, but it's just something I can see on the horizon, that do we want to move away from what Formula One is, and that's great racing.
No, I'm completely with you on that one, Mark. Hashtag PBCF1, people are getting in touch. Jack, there's too many street races. We shouldn't forget the proper circuits just for the money these street tracks offer. SJ says that Andrew, not everyone loves Monaco. It's a terrible racetrack, but a good event. Dean, if I want more street circuits, I'll carry on watching things like Formula E. Carrie, no. If we're going to replace Barcelona, I don't want another street track. So I think at the end of the day, if it produces great racing, nobody's going to care if it's a street or a permanent racetrack.
I don't think it's going to be, from what I don't have that much information about it, but I don't think it's going to be a street track like Singapore. It's not like in the middle of a city. It's a track that's been built around a new place that's been built. You see what I mean? So it could even feel more like a permanent circuit than a street track. I don't know. I've not seen the plans yet.
Yeah, a bit like a Jeddah perhaps.
Well, that's a good point. Not all street tracks are terrible. We should make that point.
Yes, we're not anti street tracks here, but the Circuit de Barcelona Catalunya does have a contract until 2026, so at the end of 2025 that will be up. Here's Norris.
How far we are from dry conditions? How far from slicks?
Tough to say, but the inches have gone up already, so what would be better is to put a slick on and see how that is.
Oh, they get to risk it though. That was Lando Norris to his McLaren engineer. Verstappen, his last lap time run was about 10 seconds off the pace. With 10 minutes left to go of this session, only Hamilton, Alonso, Hülkenberg, Magnussen are in the pit lane. Everybody else is out there braving it, but it doesn't look wet, but there are certain parts where there is a little bit of spray that's kicked up, but on the face of it, it's dry.
Yeah, but this is that crucial information. This is why everyone's out there right now, because this is a critical piece of info that everybody needs, because if it's like this afternoon, if we get rain, then it starts to dry out, or even if it goes the other way, the teams are now looking at what kind of lap time is the crossover point. So what type of lap time can they do on an intermediate tyre before it then becomes quicker to get onto a slick? That's something that you can only find out really by testing it or by watching someone else test it, and that's what we're probably about to find out here. So if Norris were to go onto the slick tyres now, the whole pit lane will be watching him.
Yeah, I think the rain is mainly affecting the track just based off of seeing Valtteri Bottas come around the lap. In the latter part, the final sector 10, 11 and 12 seem fairly wet, especially offline when you dip a wheel, especially braking into the left-hander of 10. You do run out a little bit wide. There is absolutely water there, but then you come back onto the main straight and it certainly looks, to the untrained eye, much, much drier. But Bottas coming across the line, he was much the same as Verstappen, about 10 seconds off his fastest lap time.
And this is also where the teams that have experienced drivers, they're in a much better position, right? You don't want to put a rookie out in conditions that are like this on a slick tyre, because there's a high risk of them damaging the car, like we've seen with Logan Sargent, and that means you've got almost no time to get it repaired in time for qualifying. This
is the sound of Lance Stroll on the Aston Martin, coming into the downhill left-hander of turn 5 and off.
We're going to box, Lance, box.
Why?
We need to box and check the floor.
I'm surprised the engineer didn't say so. You don't make the car even worse than you already have, mate.
So Stroll locked up slightly, went straight on into the gravel, managed to keep it out of the wall. Bit of a tight turning point for him though, and rejoins. And he wonders why his engineer wants to just double check the floor of that Aston Martin. And Stroll has made it back to the pit lane. This is the sound, meanwhile, of Lando Norris coming into, I think, the wetter part of the circuit, certainly the left-hander through 10. He can barely put his foot to the floor without the rear end stepping out of that McLaren. He manages to get by Red Bull through the right-hander of 12. Then comes the now long right-hander of 13. A slight pause, the pit lane entry to your right, and then the final corner. It wasn't flat really during the drive for many. It's certainly not going to be flat in these conditions, but crucially, he is on the slick, soft tyre as he starts his first fast lap on this tyre in these tricky conditions, down through the gears into turn 1, nice and smooth. So this is certainly the dry part of the track, the earlier part. Through turn 3 he goes.
Yeah, on he goes then up the hill, very, very long right-hander, really leaning on the aerodynamics of the car and the grip of that slick tyre. Big, heavy braking zone downhill. Let's hear from Bottas.
So sector 1 and 2 is kind of okay, but sector 3 is damp, not good for slicks.
There you go, that was Valtteri just giving us exactly what we thought there. Let's carry on with Lando Norris though, as he comes down the hill towards turn 7. It's a left-hander, cuts across the curve of 8, back up the hill. Now coming to the final sector, right-hand turn, plenty of grip all around this part of the lap, and it's only going to be in that final sector, turn 3, where he's going to find it very tricky, and that's where, of course, the biggest risk is. Jumping on the brakes into turn 10, gets it turned in nicely. Now this bit was always tricky, we've seen people sliding. Lando just fighting with the steering wheel a little bit. Through turn 12, the right-hander, and he's got 2 corners to go. The fast right-handers, new for this year. This is going to be a real test. In he turns it. Carefully does it, the final corner, massive lift into turn 14, but he's through there nice and cleanly, stays off the curbs and across the line, and he's 7, nearly 8 seconds off Verstappen on the intermediate tyre.
Why is the brakes are so... What's wrong with the brakes?
Okay, we are ticking.
So I don't think Lando Norris is particularly happy with his brakes, but he made it round the lap, nice and tidily, just about, for Norris, whose best finishing position in the Spanish Grand Prix has been 8th a couple of times. This is the sound of Pierre Gasly, the Frenchman in the Alpine, making his way downhill and up then towards the left-hander of 7 as he makes his way uphill and across the gravel. He doesn't make the left-hander and he glides through, and that is the sound you can hearing of the floor coming together with the stones, and he does manage to get out of the gravel and rejoins just before the right-hander of 9, Andrew Benson.
So, although Pierre Gasly kind of undermined the point I'm about to make by going off, actually, if this was a Grand Prix, they'd all be dashing in for slicks, because Lando Norris was 2 seconds faster on those slicks than anybody else had gone on the Inters before.
Yeah, I called that wrong. I said he was slower, but it was slower than, of course, Max Verstappen's dry time at the start of the session. So, yeah, apologies for that.
No, I wasn't trying to correct you. I was just trying to make...
you are right.
Yeah, more and more heading out on the soft tyre then. Here's Lando, though.
Currently, we don't see any progress on the brakes. We keep checking.
So no problems on the brakes. Those out there on the soft tyre is the Ferrari of Carlos Sainz, the Aston Martin of Fernando Alonso, Charles Leclerc's Ferrari, and Nick de Vries in the AlphaTauri, and Alex Albon in the Williams.
Probably what Lando's feeling with the brakes is the fact that he's having to go slower. He's on that slick tyre, trying to sort of tiptoe his way around a large part of the lap, and therefore you don't get brake temperature, and that makes a massive difference to how they feel.
Starting his first flyer then in these drying conditions on the Redwood soft tyre, the C3 tyre, the fastest tyre that Pirelli have brought for this weekend's Spanish Grand Prix, is the Spaniard from Madrid. About an hour and a half flight from Barcelona, a 3-hour train or so, more centrally located in Spain, and Carlos Sainz making his way into turn 5 and the left-hander downhill. He doesn't do a stroll and he keeps it on track.
The other thing that's interesting about that point I just made about the tyres is that the teams, this is why the teams go out on Inters when it's slightly sort of iffy. Is it Inter, is it slick, what's going to happen, blah blah blah. It's because they now know what the crossover time is. So they know that when people are doing 1 minute 24s, which is what they were doing before, the fastest people like Max Verstappen and George Russell on the Inter tyres, and then if you put on the slick, you're going to go faster. So that's valuable information for the engineers and drivers going into the race.
Absolutely. And people asking on hashtag BBCF1 what is the point, and that's exactly the point of why they're going out now, to gather that all-important data, because rain is still a risk. It may not be coming down now, but it certainly could come back for qualifying, and there is still a risk of rain for Sunday's Grand Prix. So to get an idea of the track conditions when there's been heavy rain to a more drier lap time, certainly it is worth risking it in FP3 to find that out. And so far so good, with 2.5 minutes left on the clock, and Sergio Perez in the Red Bull makes his way out of the pit lane and onto the track as he gears up for a fast lap. So too does Fernando Alonso, one of the 2 home drivers from Oviedo in Spain, which is sort of on the northeastern tip of Spain, about another hour and a half flight from here, and that's the sound you can hear on the board the Aston Martin through the right-hander of turn 9.
Your geography's a bit dodgy, mate.
Is it not?
Asturias is in the northwest.
Northwest? Oh no, northwest. Oh no, I meant that. I meant northwest. Never eat shredded wheat. That's how you do it, isn't it?
Can I tell you as well, I do a bit of tourism advice here. Asturias and Cantabria, the two, and the Basque Country on the north coast of Spain, absolutely lovely. Ooh. Really lovely.
Somebody did actually ask, can you, so your bucket list 5 Grand Prix to visit on the hashtag BBCF1.
Well, there isn't a Grand Prix in Oviedo.
Well, no. But if we're getting into destination advice from Andrew Benson, then maybe that's the way we cover it. But street track certainly a bit hit and miss sometimes, I'm sure, on Benson's list. A minute and a half left on the clock, and pretty much everybody who is out there is on the soft tyres. Those who are not out there: Hulkenberg, Ocon, Magnussen, Gasly.
It's not the time really, is it? Because we've only got 2 minutes left. Here's some radio.
Mamma mia.
That was Nick de Vries in the AlphaTauri coming into turn 1, coming a cropper with traffic, and it didn't look too bad to me, actually, Mark.
No, somebody exiting the pit says he was hoping to turn into turn one and just I can put him off his stride a little bit. So yeah, a bit frustrated. It is frustrating because the clock's ticking down. That was probably his last opportunity for a flying lap, and that's now been ruined. So I get the frustration. But yeah, 40 seconds to go to the checkered flag, and these are crucial laps because this is the last opportunity for the drivers to be in the cars before the all-important qualifying session. This feeling, the feeling they get now on this lap, is the one that they're going to carry into this afternoon's critical moment when it really matters. It could well be, of course, that conditions are very different by that point, and that's a challenge that everyone's going to have to deal with.
Lewis Hamilton on the back straight, but here's Verstappen first.
I don't really feel comfortable pushing in this condition. I think it's a waste.
Everybody else is pushing, but just let us know.
That's an interest.
I don't give a if everyone else is pushing. It makes no sense.
Okay,
that's brilliant.
So Verstappen doesn't want to risk it, and well, it doesn't. It's a valid point, but I mean, everyone is pushing. For all intents and purposes, it's dry. The checker flag is out anyway as Hamilton comes across the line to take it. And that incident between Nick de Vries and Carlos Sainz in the Ferrari, it was coming out of the pit lane and putting de Vries off his stride, has been noted by the stewards. But
it felt like a bit of a roasting from his engineer. But he's doing it.
Yeah.
Look at this guy over here. He's doing it. He's going quickly.
But Verstappen doesn't care. He does not care. Either way, he's fastest from that opening dry running that we had. No one is going to go faster, so the checker flag is out. Verstappen does take it and gets it with his fastest lap time overall with a 1:13.664, 2/10 ahead of his teammate Sergio Perez. Lewis Hamilton ending FP3 in third for Mercedes, ahead of Carlos Sainz, Fernando Alonso the top 5, George Russell, Charles Leclerc, Valtteri Bottas, Yuki Tsunoda, Lando Norris the top 10, Zhou Guanyu, Nick de Vries, Lance Stroll, Nico Hülkenberg, Oscar Piastri the top 15. Then it's Esteban Ocon, Kevin Magnussen, Pierre Gasly, Alexander Albon and Logan Sargent 20th and last, and Sargent crashing out early doors in the first part of free practice 3 through the right-hander, the final corner now, into the gravel, finding the wall. That was his day done. That was a red flag for free practice 3. The rain came out and we didn't get much more running after that, bar these last 10 or so minutes.
Do you want a tiny bit of time trivia?
Absolutely.
So on that last run on the slicks in the drying conditions, the fastest driver of the field was, guess?
Norris.
Nick de Vries. 1:15.9, followed by the two Ferrari drivers, Leclerc and Sainz, on 1:16.7 and 1:16.8, and then Fernando Alonso.
There you go. So that didn't hamper him too much turning into turn 1 Nick de Vries, did it, when he was shouting down the radio? I think what we've learned in this session, well, we haven't learned very much. The teams have learned a huge amount because getting through those conditions and learning what their car feels like in that changeable condition is critical. It's crucial information that they needed to get hold of. From our point of view, we've learned very little really because we only got the clear dry running at the very beginning of the session, only really a couple of runs on for each driver. There was no opportunity for the drivers to tweak their cars and improve them over the course of that session. So we don't really have a very clear picture of what the pecking order is, and that was really the case yesterday, which I happen to think is great. That sets us up for a weekend where we don't really know. Yes, Max Verstappen is clearly the class leading driver. He's still dominant in pretty much all conditions. Behind that, though, it's anyone's guess.
Well, I think we learned quite a lot, especially about Andrew Benson's opinions on Spain, Barcelona or Madrid and street circuits in general. I think we know, but we will not learn about his Vegas trip. That stays behind Andrew Benson's mind. OK, that just about does it then for free practice 3. Thank you very much, the BBC's chief F1 writer, Andrew Benson, the former McLaren mechanic, Mark Priestley, alongside myself, Harry Benjamin. Max Verstappen does it again, fastest at the end of free practice 3. We now head into qualifying. Join us at 3 o'clock across the BBC Sport website and the BBC Sport app. This has been an IMG production for BBC Radio 5 Live.